Hi, I'm Rhonda Garrison, Executive Director of the Corn Growers Association of North Carolina. We're here at Roberts Farm in Robeson County to show you some early water damage on early planted corn. Your assessment dollars funded this research, and we would like for you to be involved in your association. If you have comments or questions, contact us at any time.
In this crazy world, there are just a few things you can count on. Your mother's love, all-American apple pie, and in corn production in North Carolina, you can count on getting heavy rainfall or even a flood sometimes during the growing season, particularly early on in May or June when this corn is just starting to really get some leaves on it and grow off. Here today, we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of those kind of early heavy rainfall events on our corn crop. We're going to talk about some of the lingering effects that we see here, even at tassel time here. It's somewhat ironic here today. We're in the middle of June. It's been very hot and dry, and what happens just before we come here to the field, it rains. And so I got my mud waders on here today to talk about excessive rainfall, somewhat ironic. But we're going to talk a little bit about the effects here now in July as this corn's starting to get toward maturity, and then hopefully give you some ideas of how you can address these kind of problems, like I said, that you can almost count on year in and year out. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when corn gets too much rainfall. We're talking rainfall events of 2, 3, 4, 6, 8. We've had 14-inch rainfall events on corn, even in this year in 2020. What happens during that time? Well, most of the time that crop is about V4 to V7. And at that time, that root system is fairly poorly developed. And as those roots try to get nutrients, that excessive rainfall displaces the air in that soil profile, and those roots are left oxygen starved. And without oxygen, they don't have the energy in order to take up nutrients. So even though we may have plenty of nitrogen at the time, that root system is not functioning very well to pick that nitrogen up. Furthermore, that flooded or saturated soil creates a condition in which that soil has less oxygen. So as a result, we get denitrification occurring because of those bacteria that like to function in environments where there's no oxygen. They get their oxygen literally from the nitrogen compounds in the soil. So as a result, we lose oxygen, our roots can't pick up nutrients, and the result of that is a yellowing of the crop and a problem. Now you can see that here today still in July. For instance, here's a treatment that we put on corn. These 4 rows all have the same treatment here. It's a 38,000 plant population. We had starter fertilizer. We've got a total of 230 units of nitrogen here. That should be plenty of nitrogen for any corn crop growing in North Carolina. And yet you see the effects of that early rainfall events that occurred in May and early June. The 2 rows over here are extremely yellow, all the way from the bottom to the top, showing that nitrogen deficiency all the way through the plant. These 2 rows over here are somewhat greener. And that gives you somewhat of an idea of what might be some differences. Because if you would stand back and look, I hope you can see that in this video, you can see that these 2 rows are lower. The elevation reduces slightly, just those 4, maybe as much as 5 inches there. But that reduction in elevation means that that water sits over that soil and saturates it just a day longer. And yet that's the difference between some of the way this looks. So that tells you a little bit about some of the things that are going on in the soil. Saturated soils, the longer they stay saturated, the more impact that we're going to have in this crop right here. Before we start talking about solutions, let's take a little bit of a look at what the long-term effects are here. So here we have, again on the left side, those are the 2 rows that dried out a little quicker. Here on my right, your left, while you see the 2 ears from the 2 rows that stayed wet longer. Indeed, even here at where we're reaching dent stage here, even here at dent stage, well, you can see the severe impacts. Now, why did this, this is important to understand. Why did this happen? What caused these ears, particularly these that are showing such a poor pollination here, There's cob there, but poor pollination. What happened? Why did that water have such a long-lasting effect? Well, that lasting effect is that nutrient effect. It's nitrogen. When your plant is deficient in nitrogen, coming up towards silking and tasseling, it is not producing the energy needed to produce the female flower. So as a result, it lacks the ovules to pollinate. So this is not a pollination problem. This is a nitrogen problem. And that's the issue here with water. It really drives home the point of what the issue is with these heavy rainfall events. We've got to somehow get these nutrients into these plants. We've got to overcome that saturated condition and be able to still uptake nutrients early in the season so that by the time we hit silking, we got enough nitrogen to go ahead and form these female flowers on this cob and go ahead and get this corn pollinated, which is what happened, like I said, in these years where they just had a little bit drier condition, allowed that nitrogen. You can see that in the greenness in that leaf, a little bit better nitrogen by the time they reached pollination here. So that's the difference here. The cob lengths are the same, quite frankly. We have the same size of cob, we just don't have the flowers that were developed on those cobs because of the nutrient deficiency. So let's start. We're going to start here and start talking a little bit about what you can do to help your corn crop through these periods and help try to solve this problem of consistent heavy rainfall. So let's start right here. This is a good plot to talk about it, and I've already mentioned it. First thing is drainage. Drainage. 4 to 5 inches of difference made this much difference here. So that's important. We've got to get surface runoff off these fields and get these soils dried out as quickly as possible. So drainage is a critical issue here. We can do that with hoe drains, we could do that with bedding, we could do that with in-row subsoiling to try to get better internal drainage. Pay close attention to drainage as we start talking about how to solve these problems with these early season rainfall. You might ask, how much rainfall have we had here at this site near Lumberton here on this corn crop that's looking with these nitrogen deficiency symptoms? Well, one of the nice tools that we have here in monitoring that is these soil moisture probes that we've got in the ground. This is the communication tower off of that. These are taking soil moisture every 4 inches from the surface all the way down 4 feet. So we can monitor, and you'll see a graph here of how moisture was above above flood stage early in the season, and then has trended down as the year has gone by. So indeed, we've got some tools that allow us to show how that moisture has been affecting this crop season long here with this in-soil probe here that communicates every 15 minutes. Besides drainage, what else can we do that might make a difference in how that crop responds to these heavy rainfall or flooding events early in the season? Well, of course, the second thing your mind turns to is nutrients. Is there some, particularly nitrogen, those mobile or soluble nutrients like nitrogen and sulfur? Is there something I could do to improve that? Now, I don't have a good demonstration of different nitrogen rates here, but keep in mind, we split nitrogen on these plots. We put an early application of nitrogen, came back with another 180 units of nitrogen, and still are getting nitrogen deficiency here. The problem with different rates of nitrogen, or even just a split nitrogen application, is that if you continue to get heavy rainfall, you need to continue to apply more nitrogen. So the one issue that we can see here as we look at how deficient these plants are here at BT or late into grain fill is that we need to look at split nitrogen, and sometimes even as much as 2 or 3 splits. Even up to tassel time, you may need to put some nitrogen on to try to replace lost nitrogen or to try to solve a situation where you've had a lot of nitrogen deficiency due to rainfall and saturated soils. Is there anything else besides splitting nitrogen frequently that we might use to help this as far as a nutrient or an application approach? Well, one of the things we've looked at and are looking at in these plots is using some materials that stimulate the resistance mechanism, so to speak, the ability of the plant to tolerate stress. And that's the one product we have here today is all but Some of you may know it as Triable from the Triangle Chemical Company. This is a material that's an enzyme. It's an enzyme that stimulates the plant's stress responses and tries to help that plant work through nitrogen stress periods and still be able to produce a grain or a decent sized ear. So that's the plots we've got here is the albit or Triable in this plot, the lack of albit, in other words, no albit or Triable in that plot. There's a little color difference. I wouldn't expect a lot because the Triable's not replacing nitrogen here. It's just trying to help the plant tolerate that nitrogen stress. And then here we've got some ears that we collected from these plots. Not a huge difference, I have to admit, maybe a little bit of difference. We'll let the combine yield monitor tell us, and you'll want to look for that data here from these field sites. But again, this is an approach trying to help stimulate that plant's stress tolerance so it's able to still function, put on ovules or flowers through that stress period. What else can we do here? Let's take a look at some other plots. Another thing that we can look at in trying to solve this problem of too much water on cornfields early in the season is utilizing transpiration. You know, we talked about getting rid of water through drainage or deep tillage as a way to get that water removed from that field so that we can go ahead and get air into the soil. But another tool that we oftentimes forget about is the ability for the plant to take that water up and transpire it into the atmosphere, get rid of water that way. So let's take a look at a couple of management things we can do that have some influence on transpiration and see how they might impact this nitrogen problem that we've seen develop in this field. Here we've got 20-inch rows in this shot here. So these are all 20-inch rows at different plant populations, everything from 26,000. This one happens to be 38,000 right here. The beauty of narrow rows, when you're getting a lot of rainfall, is that you're able to space the plants out a little more evenly across the surface of the soil. So that allows those plants to find regions that may be drying up so that they can function better, or perhaps help that root system transpire more of that moisture that's between the rows. So we can see here as we look at these ears today how that has turned out as far as ear development. Yes, we still got clearly some pollination problems. We haven't, transpiration alone cannot solve this problem clearly, but they don't look too bad. There's going to be some corn in these narrow situations. Now, is there an advantage? There's 26,000 right over there compared to the 38 I was in right here, and of course this is 38 and 26. Is there an advantage to different populations in narrow rows? Doesn't look so much. We just looked at the narrow rows. Let's look at the wide rows. In the same configuration here, I'm standing again by 38,000 plant population, but you can see here that this is a 36-inch or a much wider row here. Again, the idea being that we're trying to get more water out of the soil through transpiration. How did that work out? So let's take a look at these ears here. Here's the 38,000 in the 20s. Here's the 38,000 in the 36. Plenty of plants, but they look about the same. So we're getting about the same amount of root mass, same amount of transpiration. What's interesting is to compare the 26,000 where we scattered those plants out with 26,000 where they're now in these wider rows, all neck and neck with each other. We're not getting the same amount of transpiration, are we? We've got bad kernel fill here. We got a lot of stress here. So indeed, as we think about transpiration, you can see the tools that we ought to be thinking about. We need more plants, and we need to space them out better if we're going to really use transpiration as a tool in this operation here. So I think we've given you a few ideas here, hopefully today. First of all, to show how serious, how very, very serious early season rainfall is on a corn crop. The effects that it has season long in affecting pollination and yield. I hope you've been able to see how delicate that elevation was in producing better corn and reducing that stress by allowing that soil to dry a little quicker. I hope you could see that indeed there's some things we might think about. Nutrients, certainly nitrogen, multiple applications of nitrogen, not total nitrogen, but just applying it more often can do. And finally, utilizing transpiration here to try to get more of that water transpired out of that soil and get the environment so that we can, again, start taking up the nitrogen that is available there. I hope you've learned some things here today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm hoping that you have a successful conclusion to this 2020 season.
I'm Alex Jordan with the Corn Growers Association of North Carolina, and I'd like to thank Ron Heiniger and his staff for coming out, helping us with these virtual field days. With the COVID-19 and not being able to have the field days that we normally have, I feel like this has been a valuable resource that we can use. I actually like these better than I do the field days because you can go back, watch them at your own leisure, rewind them, catch what you missed, and then talk about it with other people. There's going to be several of these. They're going to cover the field days that we normally have. You'll be able to see them on our website. It's on the Facebook page, the Corn Growers of North Carolina, and it's also on our Facebook page. You can go and watch each one of them at your own leisure. I appreciate everything we've done. The one thing I'd like for you to do as you watch them, think about what you'd like to see, what you'd like for us to research in the future, so that we can do what we feel like we need to do for our corn growers, because that's who we're working for. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.